Now, as some of you may know, I was canceled in June of this year for my gender critical views. So I still have my job as a professor, but I lost an administrative position. I was dismissed from an administrative position as undergraduate programs chair in my department. Happily, my faculty association is pursuing a grievance on my behalf. It's not resolved yet. Interestingly, the university has refused to put the reasons for my dismissal in writing. I have those reasons because in the meetings with my department chair and my faculty dean, I recorded those meetings with their permission. So they told me very clearly that it was because of anonymous, unofficial student complaints, that I also know that certain faculty colleagues were really actively soliciting and gathering and organizing. There's also a petition circulating on some parts of the internet it's been promoted by at least one colleague. I think it was organized by students. The only reason I know about it is because a student journalist contacted me about it. It was a surprise to me. No one had let me know this was out there. And I've seen it, and some of the things it says are, you know, it's great that she was dismissed because she's a transphobe, which I think, well, you know, that's a matter of opinion. They're allowed to say that. But it also makes some allegations about my conduct that are not true, but I can't respond to it, or at least I can't figure out how to respond to it until it gets publicly talked about. And funnily enough, that student journalist who contacted me about it now hasn't appeared in the student newspaper. The student journalist has been refusing to return my calls. And I can't tell what to think about that. I don't know, sometimes it makes me a little bit hopeful because I think, oh, does that mean they've sort of, there's been a pushback? Or are they just plotting something much worse and you know, I'm waiting for the next shoe to drop. So anyway, that's my personal experience. I've been thinking all week about what I could say today to this audience of women, and particularly, you know, there's been a lot of tough acts to follow because there have been so many amazing, incisive feminist analyses, including today, from around the world, week after week. And really, it's difficult to be, I find it's difficult in some ways to be articulate about this, because my principal feeling, as probably the principal feeling of many of you, is I'm just gobsmacked that it's happening. It's just so bananas. And how can we be this kind of tiny embattled group of women who are saying so out loud? I've gotten a lot of supportive emails about my case from around the world, but really from colleagues at work. There are about 2,000 faculty members at the University of Alberta. I've gotten almost nothing in the way of support. And in fact, yesterday, you know, like many people, I'm mostly working at home, but I happened to be on campus yesterday, and I'm in the pretty much empty hallways, and a feminist colleague happened to be there as well, and she didn't look at me, she wouldn't say hello to me, and those kinds of things are both shattering and also make me think in my less optimistic moments. You know, one of the things we often say is, well, common sense is going to win out in the end, that people are going to realize that this is not sensible and you can't treat women this way. And in my less optimistic moments, I feel like when we say that, we're forgetting everything about the history of misogyny and all of the ways across the history of the human story that common sense has never spared women anything. But this kind of, that pessimistic thought has actually helped me think about cancel culture. So that's briefly what I just want to share what I think in the last little bit of time I have here. So the current idea of cancellation, I believe, is a metaphor borrowed from the world of television. I did a little bit of web searching. I couldn't exactly track this down, so I can't prove this is true. But I think the idea comes from the notion of a TV series that's canceled, a TV series that nobody likes or nobody wants to watch anymore, that TV series gets canceled. And if we follow out this metaphor, the opposite to cancellation would be getting picked up. So, you know, you have pilot season and there's all these television shows that get aired and only some of them get a buzz around them and only some of them get picked up. Now, my experience of cancellation suggests to me that a lot of canceling is done by people who are themselves hoping to be picked up. They want this kind of notice, they want this kind of buzz around them, they're engaging in a bit of viral self-marketing, they're kind of imagining the headlines like local hero slays turf dragon. That's what they're hoping for. And the colleagues who really went for me, at the same time that there was a lot of behind the scenes machinations, they were all over Twitter and Facebook, which I've never been so glad I don't use, sort of, crowing about like, I'm one of the heroes who is canceling this bad lady. Okay, and we know on the side we know that the reason people are trying to get this focus as like, I am a canceller, is because the other side is where all the prizes are. Our side doesn't have funding, we don't control institutions, we haven't captured policy. However, as hard as it is on our side, I think it's also pretty hard on that side, because despite being where the action is, despite being where the money is, that side is crowded. It's hard to get picked up. It's not enough to put your pronouns in your Twitter bio. You have to do something else to stand out from the crowd. You really have to hustle. It's like a game of musical chairs. And it's a dynamic, it's kind of an anxious dynamic of competitive scarcity over there. I do think that's a lot of what we are seeing. So there's good births on the other side. There's good births in academia, there's good births in government, there's good births in journalism, think tanks, NGOs. One of the things that's been incredibly valuable I've found about these webinars is to learn from our sisters around the world about the role that NGOs are playing overseas, that these are places that offer you some of the few slots that can get you a kind of prestigious middle-class lifestyle if you get picked up, if you are one of the lucky ones who gets picked up. So many people we know, and I think this helps us think about the whole kind of, contemporary ecosystem that we're facing. So many people are facing kind of bleak life prospects. There's staggering inequality around the world. There is a lot of precarity in people's lives. And so I think the viciousness of the attacks on us are not just about the content of our views, although they are, of course, about the content of our views. They're also about the form of life in the contemporary world. The modes of exploitation that we're fighting against. So the erasure of women, the use of their bodies, the expropriation of their reproductive powers, these really are the oldest forms of exploitation, and they're really roaring back right now. It seems newfangled, and I think some of the reasons it feels is because it is internet mediated. So we're like, it's because of social media. But I think here this is what's in a way such a relief about being a radical feminist and reading radical feminist theory, is the insights of somebody. I think of somebody like Gerda Lerner, who talked about the invention of slavery via the taking of the children of captured women. She called this the first technology. So this was the first means of increasing productive power. So it's an unsentimental view, but it also says this mode of exploitation, this is the first mode of exploitation, this is the first technology. It's not something new, it's something very old. So many forms of inequality we know are currently on the march. They're roaring back across many fronts. We're seeing around the world, we're seeing what is very obviously neo-imperialism. I was just reading the other day about AFRICOM, the US military command in Africa, which with very little public notice is building military bases all across Africa. Really scary forms of militarism, wars that we barely read about, like what's happening in Yemen. the squeezing of the last bits of the natural world. So we hear a lot about climate change, but we don't hear about mining. We don't hear about logging. We don't hear about, I mean, unless you seek it out, we don't hear about the disappearance of species, habitat destruction. I know many of you read Renee Gerlich from New Zealand. She's so fantastic on this. I've learned a lot from reading her. But all of these are things that we had gone quite a long ways towards pushing back during the 20th century. We hadn't succeeded, but we really tried, right? Like we started to get someplace. And I think if you look, for me, I think a watershed moment is like 1980, that feminism had really like pushed back, you know, pushed them back, way back. And there's been a backlash. Yeah, so I would say we shouldn't be too fooled by the role of social media, although of course it impacts us in our everyday lives. We need to also keep in mind that the forces arrayed against us are very old, they're very strong, and they're very tricky. This means I'm not always optimistic. But what we do have, and it's not nothing, is seeing these forces clearly, more clearly than I think most people see them. We also have, and this is something that I'm so grateful to the Women's Human Rights Campaign for, we also have our international solidarity. That one of the things that's so fantastic about these webinars is, really, like, you see it in Brazil, you see it in Korea, you see it in Germany, you see it in Australia. I see it too. Like, we're not crazy, right? We're seeing it around the world. Yes, yes, yes. So, just to conclude, I'm not always sure that we are going to win. We might not win, but I think we have to fight anyway. And I also think we are in such good company.